Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. Welcome to Rising. We, of course, have a great show for you this morning. Ryan, what's on the agenda today?
Well, the FDA is expected to give the Pfizer vaccine full approval. Regulators are still in the process of reviewing the Moderna vaccine's application for approval, which is believed to come in the next few weeks. But first, while initial evacuations of Americans and allies on the ground in Afghanistan was a bit messy, to put it lightly, we covered that extensively here on the show, the removal process since has been much smoother. The White House tweeted updates on the numbers of evacuees. From August 21st to August 22nd, there have been 23 U.S. military flights evacuating approximately 3,900 personnel from Afghanistan and 35 coalition aircraft, including partners, foreign military and commercial airlines, evacuating approximately 3,900 personnel. There have been approximately 25,100 personnel on both military and coalition flights evacuated since August 14th. Those numbers are slightly higher according to numbers that just came out seconds ago. They go on to tweet, there have been approximately 30,000 personnel on both military and coalition flights evacuated since the end of July. On Sunday, the Pentagon announced the order of U.S. commercial airlines to provide planes to help speed up Afghanistan evacuation efforts. Alyssa, if you only watched cable news, you might think that there had been maybe a handful of people who'd been evacuated over the past week, and not the tens of thousands that have been moved out. What do you think is going on here?
Well, it's certainly become a much more improved operation since last week. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, and kudos to the U.S. military, our coalition partners, and the Biden administration for pulling that together. But I'd note this, as you mentioned, Biden called up the Civil Air Fleet. I wasn't, to be honest, even familiar with it, but it basically exists under a 1951 order that was used following the Berlin airlift to say commercial flights can have to support military operations. It's only been used twice in history, in the Gulf War and another time in the mid-90s. So I think it's hard to say that this was well planned and well executed if we're trying to have to call up this emergency commercial fleet to support our efforts. It kind of goes back to the point I've been making throughout, which is there was a total lack of planning ahead of this. Luckily, things are getting smoother and the operation's improving, but you're not calling up the Civil Air Fleet if you had a great plan ahead of schedule and order. Kim, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, just to be clear on that also is that those commercial airliners, because when I heard that, I thought, oh my gosh, could you imagine being a pilot on one of these airliners and then you're told you got to go and start helping out? They are not actually going into Afghanistan. They are actually picking up passengers from. So what's happening is the refugees are being taken to sort of these points like Doha, I believe, and then they're being picked up from there and taken to other places on those commercial airliners. So that is somewhat good news, I think, for those commercial airliners. But yeah, I agree with you that I think if we're getting the numbers right, Ryan, is it that if they're saying that 30,000 have been evacuated since the end of July, we're talking 5,000. Is that right? 5,000 had been evacuated previously and now 25,000?
The latest number is 37,000 since August 14th. So since that calamitous weekend that played on a looped cable, 37,000 have been evacuated. I think the mainstream media really has a strong incentive here to downplay this story, because I think they've been playing up. They significantly played up the chaos that weekend as a proxy, as a way for them to kind of target the withdrawal itself without directly attacking the withdrawal, because 70+% of the American people are fully supportive of getting out. So they can't go directly at getting out. So that instead they wanted to say, well, okay, fine, if you really wanted to get out, but we should have done it in a much better way.
But don't you think the media
starts to happen in a better way, now they're boxed in and have to say, okay, well, it's a good thing that people are getting out, and it's a good thing that we're withdrawing troops.
Don't you think the media has a responsibility to echo the sentiments of the American people to some degree? I mean, I understand your point that the media is definitely all about warmongering. We've seen this over and over. When Trump pulled troops out of Syria, it was, oh, you're abandoning the Kurds, which, that was Kurdish fighters. That was very different than leaving civilians and unarmed people behind enemy lines. But I mean, in this particular situation,
there were a lot of Kurdish civilians that behind those enemy lines.
They were protected by Kurdish fighters.
But if you compare the mainstream media approach to this, it's 99-1 calling this like the greatest calamity, since Saigon. But if you poll the American people, even the American people were saying, roughly 50% of them were saying, actually, this is going just fine, despite what the media was saying.
Just to be clear, this is a
that's true. I mean, that's what the polls said.
But this is a very fluid situation. So while I agree that the evacuation numbers are becoming a success story and something we should be rooting for, you've had 20 people die so far in this conflict, mostly Afghan citizens, not military. You have an unfolding humanitarian crisis at Hamid Karzai. So there have been reports from in theater where people are actually leaving the airport and taking the chances of staying in their home because it's more sanitary. There's more access to water, somewhere for like children to safely sleep. So this is still extremely fluid. There were also reports over the weekend of ISIS breaking through to the area surrounding Kabul. So you have ISIS-K, which is the Afghanistan version of it. You have the Haqqanis securing the airport in coordination with the Taliban. So there's still a very, very volatile threat environment around it, and I don't think we should be spiking the football yet to say it's a success.
What could be fascinating to find out, and we needed to get some firm numbers on this, what if it turns out to be the case that fewer people died violently in Afghanistan over the last week than the week before, and the week before that, and the week before that? Because while only a handful of American soldiers had been dying every year in the last couple of years in the occupation, the death count among Afghans was still extremely high. And so you may be seeing one of the more peaceful times in Afghanistan over the past decade, which says a lot about the violence that it's been facing.
So chief foreign correspondent for NBC News, Richard Engel, tweeted, Biden says the U.S. is in constant contact with the Taliban to get safe passage to the airport. So the U.S. is asking a former enemy, the Taliban, to please allow us to get our people out while they take the country. Richard's been covering this on the ground for years. He's actually probably been in for decades, on and off. That's the sentiment that I think is frustrating a lot of Americans, is so we can't come to a peace deal with the Taliban, but we are willing to trust them to safely give passage to our people to exit. Kim, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I will stand firm on this. And I know this will upset a lot of people, but I firmly believe that we need to recognize the Taliban as the official government of Afghanistan. They are a legitimate government at this point, or they're about to be as soon as they form one. And yes, we should have sat down and done a peaceful transition of power to them. I know that would have been terrible optics, but we lost the war. They won. And they legitimately now get to run their country. And so I think what's going on now with the Taliban is, luckily for us, they are playing nice, and they are allowing anyone with a U.S. passport through. I mean, I know that there are some reports of some violence or things happening, some scuffles, but for the most part, they're letting Americans through. I think that that's really great news, and it's really playing to their desire to be recognized as an official government. What are your thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I think you're right about this. And this post, and Richard has done a lot of great work, and he puts his life on his line to do this reporting. But I thought this was really reflective of this kind of blinkered American mindset that the U.S. ought to have by birthright access to everywhere on the planet, and they find it offensive that some other entity might be controlling Kabul. Like some other Afghan force might be controlling Kabul, and that we need to then negotiate with them rather than just doing what we please.
But again, if we're talking about the Taliban being an actual legitimate government, then they should give safe passage to Americans. Mm-hmm. They should follow basic human rights. They should not abuse women. They should not be forcing people to wear the hijab who don't want to. These basic things.
That's their culture, though. That's what that's, we don't, as Westerners, shouldn't have to force our religion or our thinking or our Western ways on other people.
It's not forcing our religion, though, to believe in basic human rights for women in Afghanistan.
Yeah, but I don't think we need to be fighting for that. Let them do that on their own, and they will through time.
I'm not arguing it's worthy of a war, but I just think we need to be consistent in the West that if we care about women's rights, we should care about them in Afghanistan as well.
So even though some 30,000 Americans have now been evacuated from Afghanistan after the Taliban's reconquest of Kabul, you may not have known at all due to cable news' coverage. Eric Levitz of New York Magazine writes, if news coverage focuses exhaustively on the shortcomings of Biden's withdrawal, while largely ignoring what our client states' abrupt collapse tell us about our 2-decade-long occupation, then the lesson of Kabul's fall could be quite favorable for Beltway hawks. presidents should end wars in defiance of the military brass unless they wish to become unpopular. Democratic pollster Will Jordan called out ABC News coverage of Biden's interview with George Stephanopoulos, tweeting, a politician answered a yes or no question with a no, followed by a frank explanation, and the news org removed the no. Well, so ABC News has deleted their tweet that Jordan was responded to, but we do have a screenshot here. So there it is. When asked, do you believe the Taliban have changed? Biden said, he said no, but they didn't put this in the tweet. I think they're going through some sort of existential crisis about do they want to be recognized by the international community as being a legitimate government. So interesting that they removed that no to make it. But I mean, personally, I think he should have said yes.
Well, we don't, and I think what he's saying is we don't know yet. It's too soon to tell. That clearly they do want international legitimacy in a way that they did not in the 1990s. Like when they're executing people in soccer stadiums and when they're blowing up, one of the wonders of the world. That was a government that was clearly thumbing its nose at the international community. They now have a different approach. Does that mean that it's all PR, or does it mean that there's some fundamental transformation that's gone inside the Taliban? I think what Biden's saying there is that it's too soon to tell, but we should not necessarily assume that it's any more than PR. But I thought Eric's point, and Alyssa would love to get your take on this. I thought Eric's point is a really good one, and that's what I've been trying to hit at. That if the media can spend all of the time in the wake of this evacuation complaining about the way that it's done, then it raises the cost of it for any future president who wants to exit from a disastrous war. Rather, the media could be focusing on how that rapid collapse exposed that the 20-year occupation was a lie, that actually nothing was built. Because if anything had been built, it couldn't have fallen apart in a weekend. And that instead would disincentivize future adventures, future occupations. So this is all about, what's going to be incentivized in the future for future presidents.
So I think that's actually an important point that Ryan made just now. We've got to kind of bifurcate these two things. The withdrawal was largely a disaster, though it is getting better, and that is a good thing, and I will always root for the president to improve this and safely get people out. But the real discussion is why it was done this way, why we decided that we were going to rapidly evacuate the military before diplomats and civilians. Chuck Todd asked Jake Sullivan this question point blank, and he didn't have a clear answer. Now, that's separate from the discussion over after 20 years, was the war worth it? Was this adventurism worth it? That is a very valid discussion that should not be lost in the day-to-day coverage, but they need to be looked at as two different things. I'm hardly going to pat Biden on the back over like an objectively bad military withdrawal that's led to 20 people killed, a massive humanitarian crisis, tens of thousands of people being displaced. But I certainly welcome the discussion about our, foreign occupation in different countries and the validity of that in the years ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the media can gaslight us all they want with this. And I know that that's a big fear that, Ryan, you have and many of us have, right? But I think the American people are looking at this and saying, no, this was a disaster. We should not ever do this again. And next time, and we should start pulling out of all these other places as well. But let's do it the right way this next time.
All right. And we'll tell you what's on our radars up next.